in our body fluids, we also need to regulate pH. And you'll remember that pH from previous biology lessons. pH is a measure of hydrogen ion concentration in solution in water. Now, it ranges from 0 to 14, where if you're looking at neutral, so distilled water that doesn't have anything in it, neutral is a 7. So distilled water equals a 7. And then anything that is less than a 7, we have as a base or is alkaloid. So, or no, is an acid or is acidic. Okay. So an acid is anything that is lower than 7. So a pH 3 is going to be very acidic. A base, which is also referred to as an alkaloid, alkaloid, is greater than 7. Put my zeros there always have the and my 7s. Oh yeah, so kind of strange. Okay, so we need to control pH because pH influences protein structure and therefore influences chemical reactions. If the pH is not just right, say for example in your stomach, if it's not very acidic, then your digestion of protein is going to be inhibited. But that acid isn't a good thing when we're looking at it in the small intestine. So we need to regulate pH, and it might be different in different parts of your body. But we're going to specifically talk about blood pH. So when we look at the blood pH, it hovers around 7.4, I believe. Let me make sure that that's right. Yes. So this is arterial blood. So this is the blood that's being pumped out of the heart. So it's oxygenated. So it's about 7.4. Venous blood has CO2 in it, so it is going to be a lower pH, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so how do we regulate that blood pH? We have 3 different mechanisms. So 3 mechanisms. We have chemical buffering. So chemical buffering has to do with the presence of hydrochloric acid. So when we look at hydrochloric acid, H2CO3, this is a weak acid, and it is in our blood. It's primarily in our blood because carbon dioxide and water come together to form this. So we might have talked about that a little bit when we were talking about the respiratory system. So this can go in 2 directions. So it could release hydrogen, HCO3, which is a negative. So it can release hydrogen ions or it could pick it up. So notice here it's releasing hydrogen ions. When would it release hydrogen ions? When blood pH increases. So an increase in blood pH, blood pH would cause that chemical reaction to go in this direction because the release of hydrogen ions is then therefore going to decrease blood pH and turn it back into the normal range. We also can go the other way. So if there is, if your blood becomes too acidic, then your blood pH is going to decrease. And so what happens then, this chemical reaction goes the other way. And so this is an example of a chemical buffering system, which is super important in the regulation of your blood pH. So that's the first mechanism. We also have the respiratory. So we could talk about respiratory mechanism. So let's say that we are holding our breath so that we're not ventilating properly. So that would be called hypoventilation. So this is not breathing enough. This is going to cause an increase in carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide, CO2, mixes with water to produce this acid, which is actually important, but too much of it is not a good thing. So that's a chemical reaction that occurs in our blood. So with increasing CO2, we have decreased pH, and that is actually what's detected in our body, which causes us to breathe more frequently. So respiration is detecting blood pH. So it decreases the blood pH, and this is what we call respiratory acidosis. Okay. Hyperventilation, on the other hand, means that you are breathing too much. So you're blowing off too much CO2. So that means you're getting rid of CO2. So CO2 is low. So this is going to actually increase the pH. And so this is going to lead to respiratory alkalosis. So the respiratory mechanism has to do with changing your breathing pattern so that you either retain CO2 or you get rid of CO2. So you change your breathing to regulate your blood pH. The third mechanism is what is called the renal mechanism. And renal, you now know, means kidney. So you'll remember that when we modify the filtrate, we can either reabsorb hydrogen ions or we can secrete hydrogen ions. So in the nephron, we can either secrete hydrogen ions and your urine becomes more acidic if we're getting rid of hydrogen ions. So sometimes when the urine burns, specifically like in babies, like if they're in a diaper and their urine has caused like their skin to turn bright red, it could be that they are dehydrated and they're having to get rid of all these hydrogen ions, so it makes their urine very acidic. Okay, so they secrete the hydrogen ions, or we can reabsorb them. So if my blood pH is too high, my kidney will actually reabsorb those hydrogen ions and my urine will become more basic. And so this is actually the most potent way that we can regulate blood pH, but it doesn't occur very rapidly. So this is like long-term versus short-acting. So this is our long-term regulation. So if your kidneys aren't working properly, then you're going to have a problem with maintaining proper blood pH. Now, notice that we talked about respiratory acidosis and respiratory alkalosis. We can also have what is called metabolic acidosis and respiratory alkalosis. So this actually has to do with what you're eating, and then maybe, for example, if you're vomiting. So let's look at a table that has this right here. Okay, so metabolic acidosis. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. If you have severe diarrhea, then you're going to be getting rid of intestinal juice and you're going to lose bicarbonate ions. And so that is going to cause metabolic acidosis. So the pH is going to go low. It's going to go below 7.35. If you have renal disease, if you have untreated diabetes mellitus, if you are in starvation mode, you're actually going to be burning proteins for fuel, and that can also lead to acidic metabolites and more acidic blood. And then alcohol results in metabolic acidosis. Metabolic alkalosis would be you're vomiting, or like if you've overdosed and you've had your stomach suctioned, then you're getting rid of hydrochloric acid. So then your body has to replace that hydrochloric acid by taking it out of your blood. And so your blood pH is going to go high. You could have diuretics that reduce hydrogen ion secretion, which that is going to also increase your blood pH. And then aldosterone also affects how much hydrogen ions can be secreted in the urine. So these are metabolic reasons for acidosis, which would be low blood pH, and metabolic alkalosis, which is high blood pH.